everyone, I'm London, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make this really fun succulent soy candle. Now, I'm using the Bramble Berry Succulent Silicone Mold for this project, so it's kind of an advanced technique project. If you haven't watched our Soy Basics 101 video, I would say stop, go back, watch that video, and then come back and join us for this more advanced project. It's just nice to have a couple basic candle projects under your belt. I've actually been making soy container candles for about 3 years, and I do that in my business, Particle Goods. This was by far the funnest candle I've ever made, and when I saw that succulent mold, I knew I wanted to make a project with it. This is a great centerpiece. If you're a plant lover like I am, you're gonna have a really great time making this. All right, let's get started. The first thing we need to do to create our 2-part succulent candle is going to be to make the succulent topper with our Brambleberry silicone mold. Now, if you're a soap maker, you may already be familiar with this. This is a great way to reutilize something that you've already had. The first couple of trials that I did when I was trying to make this succulent top did not go very well, but I brought them so I could show you anyway. Now, the reason I had some trouble is because soy wax tends to be a really soft wax, and that had a little bit of difficulty picking up some of the nice fine detail in this mold. If you look at some of these pieces that didn't work out very well, you'll notice that a lot of it crumbled away and didn't come out of the mold. And then there's also a lot of frosting on the surface of the wax. Now, plants in real life are also not perfect, so it's okay if your succulent mold doesn't turn out exactly perfect, but I did troubleshoot some things just to make it easier for you. What I found is that blending Nature C3 soy wax with a little bit of the white beeswax from Brambleberry worked really well. I like Nature Wax C3 because you can pour it at a hotter temperature and it's a little more resistant to frosting. These were made with the Golden Brand 464 soy wax. So I think that the frosting issue was just a combination of using a little less beeswax than I should have been and not pouring hot enough. So we're gonna go through some of those steps that I troubleshooted for you. Mixing our Nature Wax C3 with beeswax. We're also going to use these new sage green dye chips from Brambleberry. I have to be honest, I've never used dye before. This was my first time, and it's so easy. There are tons of colors to choose from. I thought the sage green worked really well for the succulent. Looks like a real plant sitting on top of your candle. So we're gonna use all of these together and pour into this mold. Now, the last trick that I found that worked really well was preheating my silicone mold. You just want it so it's warm to the touch. I'm gonna be showing you how to do that with a heat gun, but if you have an oven handy, I would say go ahead and heat that up to the lowest temperature, just so you can get it warmed so that when you're ready to pop that in, it's perfectly hot. All right, the next thing we wanna do is come over here and set up our double boiler. You can do this at home with pots that you already have. You need a large pot filled about halfway with water. You're gonna bring that to a low simmer and then nest a smaller pot on top of that. I've substituted that pot with this small pouring pitcher. This is actually what I use when I'm making candles, and I like it because it's really lightweight, has this plastic handle that resists some of the heat in the double boiler, so I'm not worried about it being too hot when I pull it out. And it also has this really nice tapered spout. So you can see this is gonna make it easy to pour that wax right into that small cavity. So while you're waiting for your water to heat up, you can go ahead and start preparing some of the other ingredients for this. I had a really hard time choosing the perfect fragrance for this project because there's quite a few that would work really well, especially visually with that candle. The greenhouse fragrance, the less succulent fragrance. I also played around with the flower child, but I ended up settling on cactus flower because every time I opened the bottle, I just could not stop smelling it. This is a really great, juicy, green, floral, almost punchy fragrance. So I found that it also had exceptional hot throw at a really low percentage. So for our compilation today, we're gonna be using this at a ratio of about 7%. Now, between 6 and 8%, it wasn't a huge difference, so you could do it at 6%. I just wanted to make the measurements really easy for me to remember. I'm gonna go ahead and weigh out my cactus flower fragrance. So I'm gonna put my measuring cup on the scale and tear out the weight. You don't wanna count that. And we're gonna be using weight for both our wax and our fragrance oil just to make sure we're keeping things really consistent. So I'm gonna measure out 0.8 ounces of our cactus flower here. Oh, a little too much, that's okay. We'll just pour that right back in there. Perfect. So that is ready to go. Now we need to heat up our wax to about 185 degrees Fahrenheit before we can add this in. So let's set that to the side for now. Okay, so we're gonna combine our Nature Wax C3, our beeswax, and our dye chips all together in the pouring pitcher and melt those down. You could use yellow beeswax. It doesn't really matter. I liked the white because I wanted a really bright, saturated color, so I thought that would work well. Now, these dye chips aren't all the same size, so you could try weighing them on the scale, but I found that that was a little bit hard for my digital scale to read. So I'm gonna go with the really technical measurement of generous pinches. So we're gonna do 4 generous pinches of this sage green. And these top ones are pretty big, so I might even do just a little bit less. It's okay to eyeball things if you want to. Like I said, it's not about making something that's perfect, it's about making something that you love, that you can share with other people. So we'll go ahead and we'll pop our pouring pitcher into the double broiler. I can see that it's just at that perfect low simmer, which means I'm not gonna have water splashing onto me, and I'm not gonna have water splashing into the wax. The other thing I'm gonna do is take my digital thermometer, and I love this digital thermometer because it has that nice bendable arm. Turn that on, and then I'm just gonna pop it onto the side so I can keep an eye on things. Perfect, so now I can see what temperature my wax is while I'm over here preparing some of our other steps. So while your wax is melting, you might need to give it a little encouraging stir just to kind of help blend everything together. You want to really make sure that all of that dye gets incorporated into the wax. Now, beeswax has a higher melting temperature than soy does, so it's going to take a little bit longer. So I'm just going to give it one little stir here. The dye is melting really nicely. I'm getting this beautiful dark green color. And the color in the melted wax will be a lot darker than it will be in your finished piece. So don't panic if it looks really dark. It's gonna lighten up quite a few shades. All right, we're gonna let that continue to melt. Okay, so it looks like our wax has reached the appropriate mixing temperature. Because we have a really high flash point with this cactus flower of about 200 degrees, it's okay if we're a little above 185, which we are. We're almost at 190. I'm gonna go ahead and remove my pouring pitcher from the double boiler, and then I'm gonna mix my fragrance in and just gently stir to incorporate. Oh, you guys, this smells so good. I wish you could smell through this camera right now. So I'm just gonna gently and steadily stir this for about a full minute, which seems like a really long time. Candle making is always a lesson in patience. But this ensures that we fully mix that fragrance oil into our wax, and then we're gonna pour at a pretty high temperature. If you watched our soy basics video, you'll know that we poured the Golden Brand 464 soy wax at a pretty low temperature, at about a 135 degrees. This wax, the Nature C3, can actually pour anywhere from 145 to 170 degrees. And for this purpose, I'm gonna say about 160 is a really great place to pour into the mold. Now I think we've got this all the way incorporated, so I'm gonna put my digital thermometer right back in there so I can keep an eye on that. And once it gets close to that pouring temperature, you're gonna wanna heat up that silicone mold. So if you're using the oven at home, make sure that you've got that ready to go. It only needs to be in there for maybe a minute or so, really just till it's warm to the touch. You don't wanna melt down your nice silicone mold. So we're at about 171. We've got a few minutes. You could gently stir this to kind of encourage it to continue to lower in temperature. I'm just gonna patiently wait until it's there, and then I'll heat up my mold about 1 minute before. So our wax is almost at 165, and remember we wanna pour right about 160. If you're kind of short on timing, I would say it's better to pour a little hotter than 160 than to pour below. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm gonna use this heat gun to heat both sides of my silicone mold and just get it ready for pouring. So using my hand to really gently make sure that I'm not overheating the mold. will say it does take a little bit of practice just to time that out and get that right, but I feel like that's warm enough to the touch that I think that will work well. Our temperature is now at 162 degrees, and I'm gonna say that's great. I'm not gonna be too technical about it. I think 160, 162, both will work just fine for this. Make sure you don't overfill the cavity. We wanna actually underfill just a little bit to make sure that we leave room so that our wax succulent can fit nice and flush on the base of the candle. So once you've poured all 4 cavities of your succulent mold, you may still have a little wax left in your pouring pitcher or your pot. That's totally okay. Go ahead and pop it back in your double boiler. Now, soy wax is usually water soluble and you can clean it up with hot soapy water, but because we've got a little beeswax in there, I'm probably not gonna do that. So I'm gonna put it back in the double boiler to make it easier to wipe out. My wax molds need to sit here and cool, so I'm gonna move them off to the side, and I'm also going to set a timer. The next step for the top of these guys is we're gonna need to pierce a hole through the back of the succulent. In order to do that, it needs to set up almost all the way. So I tried to time it in my experiments, and about an hour and a half to 2 hours is the perfect time. So set a timer, and then when those look fully opaque and almost set up, you'll be able to pierce through those with the skewer. Now we're ready to move on and make the base of our candle. We're waiting for those top succulent pieces to cool, so this is the perfect time to prepare the rest. Now we're gonna be using these glass lidded jars from brambleberry.com, and I really like this kind of apothecary shape. I think it lends itself really well to this style of project. One thing to keep in mind is that you have a narrower top and a wider base. So this might make wicking a little bit tricky. I found that because we're using beeswax in the top portion of our candle, it's actually gonna need a hotter flame and a little bit more heat to make sure that that melts properly. Remember, we want to achieve a full melt pull with every single burn, so it's really important that we can do that at the top of the candle as well as when we reach that wider diameter. Now, I played around with a couple different wicks, and I found that the HTP 1212 wick works really well for this project. It is kind of a larger size wick, so you don't want to use it on something below probably a 4-inch diameter container. But this is the wick we'll use today. It's got a really nice rigidity, so it's going to stand up and hold up really well in our candle. We're also going to be using more of our Nature Wax C3 soy wax flakes from Bramble Berry. This is honestly my favorite wax to use. I love that I can pour it at a higher temperature, and I think it's really resistant to some of those issues we talked about in our basics video, like delamination and frosting. So this is a really great wax to use. I've already measured out the wax that I need to make all 4 of our base candles. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in my pouring pitcher and then put that into my double boiler. Now we're not using any beeswax in this bottom portion because we don't need any extra firmness in the wax. So we're just gonna be using the soy. It's only the top portion where we're molding that we need that extra help from the beeswax. All right, so we are full, and I'm gonna pop that into our double boiler. Once again, just using that digital thermometer just to make sure I can keep an eye on things. This should take a few minutes to fully melt, and again, we're gonna wait to reach 185 degrees before adding more fragrance oil. I'm gonna be using the same fragrance we did before, the cactus flower fragrance. I can't get enough of it, so I just want the whole candle to smell like that fragrance oil. And we're also not adding any dye to the base of this candle. Now, I love the contrast of the white and the green, but you could also try mixing in a different dye color for the base if you really wanna get fun and kind of experiment with something. Okay, while our wax is melting, let's go ahead and measure our fragrance. I'm gonna pour 2.8 ounces of our cactus flower fragrance. I've tared out the weight of my measuring cup on the scale. Slowly pour that in. And then the other thing that I can prepare while I'm waiting for my wax to melt is just getting the containers ready to be poured. Now, I need to attach my HTP wick to the glass container, and there's a couple ways you could do that. Because we're pouring at a hotter temperature today, I recommend using something like the wick sticker here. A hot glue gun is more prone to melting if you're using a high temperature wax. So I'm just going to attach the sticker to the base of the wick tab, pull off that end, and then I'm just going to eyeball it to the center. I don't think it needs to be exactly perfect, but it should be as close to the center as you can get, and then just securely press that sticker down. So repeat that for all 4 containers. These wick stickers are totally optional, but I find that they work really well for me, and there's other things out there that you could try as well. So feel free to play around with a couple different types of adhesive and see what's gonna work at that high pouring temperature for you. All right, we've got all of our containers ready. Let's go ahead and check the temperature of our wax. So I'm just gonna stir our wax a little bit. Sometimes soy wax flakes have a tendency to kind of clump together and form a big blob in the middle of your melting pot. So I'm just gonna kind of break up some of those chunks so that it can melt a little bit faster and a little more evenly. Our wax has reached the appropriate mixing temperature. We're at about 186 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm gonna remove that from the heat. Remember, we don't wanna overheat our soy wax as it has a tendency to yellow. So we'll go ahead and mix our cactus flower fragrance in there. And then don't forget to stir fully for a good solid minute just to incorporate that. Now for this part, we're gonna pour at a temperature around 155 degrees. Remember that pouring range for Nature Wax C3 is about 145 to 170. So you'll wanna kind of do your own testing and find what works best for you and gives you really good glass adhesion. I find that there's a fine balance between getting that nice sheen on the surface and just really smooth tops while also ensuring that we get that good glass adhesion. So I'm gonna say 155. We're gonna let our wax cool while we stabilize our wicks in our container. So we'll set that to the side, put our thermometer back in there. And this pot's only about half full, so it'll probably cool down fairly quickly. Just keep your eye on it since we are pouring at that hotter temperature. In the meantime, let's talk about how to best stabilize your wick. There are a couple different options. Some of those involve clipping your wick before you pour hot wax in there, and some you can stabilize after. So I'm gonna show you 2 of my favorite ways. The first one is using this bow tie wick clip. This is a metal clip. I like it because it has these pre-drilled holes that make it really easy to center my wick, and it tends to work really well with larger containers such as this one. So I'm just gonna feed that wick through the wick clip and then push it right through that little notch on the side and bend it down. This keeps my wick out of the way while I'm pouring hot wax in there, and I'm not likely to mess it up or move it over to the side, and then this is gonna hold it perfectly in the center. For this part of the project, you don't wanna trim the wick because we need that extra length so we can slide the succulent portion on top of the wick at the end. So I'm gonna use this for 2 of them, and then for the second technique, I'll show you after we've poured the wax how to stabilize those wicks. And this is a great way to waste a little bit of time while you're waiting for your wax to cool. Perfect. So checking our temperature, we're pretty hot still. Looks like about 175 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm just gonna give it a couple encouraging stirs here. You don't want to stir too fast or too much because that's going to add a lot of unnecessary air, and that can turn into an air pocket or a cavity that will cause cratering in your finished candle. So don't stir it too much, but every once in a while it's okay to go back and do that. And then we'll just sit and let it alone while it cools a little more. Perfect. So our wax has reached the appropriate pouring temperature. We were going for 155. So I'm going to go ahead and pour my containers. Now we're not going to fill these containers all the way because we need to leave room for that top succulent piece. So I'm just going to pour to the shoulder. If you're worried about how to divvy up all of this wax, you could use your digital scale, put your container on there, and that way you can weigh out the wax evenly. We're going for about 9 ounces of wax in each container and just filling it to that shoulder. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of eyeball it. Make sure you pour your wax slowly and carefully. That's going to ensure you don't add a lot of extra air in there, and so you don't splash it around. Oh. And don't worry about those 2 wicks that we still need to secure. They're going to be just fine, and I'm going to show you how to center those once I finish pouring this last one. Perfect. So these are all filled pretty evenly. That should be exactly where we want them. Go ahead and double check, make sure your wick bow tie clip is holding those wicks center. And then for these 2 that we haven't yet secured, one thing that you might already have that works really well would be a popsicle stick or a couple popsicle sticks. You could also try a clothespin. Feel free to get creative. There's a lot of ways you could do this. For the popsicle stick method, I don't need to hold anything in place. I'm just going to gently pinch the wick between those 2 popsicle sticks and center it visually. That's the nice thing about these HTP wicks is they are very, very strong and they're pretty firm, so they're not likely to flop over, and using something like the popsicle stick method should still be able to center those just fine. You're going to want to let these cool for at least 24 hours before we assemble the succulent piece, and make sure that they're cooling in a nice temperature controlled room right around 70, 72 degrees. So before we can assemble our succulent to our base, first we need to pierce the hole into the succulent so that we can thread that wick right through the center. Now you want to do this before the mold, before the succulent piece has had a chance to fully set up. So we set our timer for about an hour and a half. It may fall somewhere between an hour and a half to 2 hours, but what you're looking for is a firm consistency. If you press on it very gently, it shouldn't have a lot of give and it should look completely opaque. So I'm going to take this wooden skewer, just this bamboo skewer, and pierce from the back all the way down through the center. And you might feel just a little bit of resistance. That's totally okay. Try to keep it as level as you can so that when you thread the wick through, it's going to go right through the center. And then we're going to let these sit for another probably 24 hours to make sure that they have a chance to fully harden. Perfect. I'm going to set these to the side, but I actually prepared some succulent pieces at home that I could bring so we can go ahead and assemble those candles right now. Let's go ahead and pop these pieces out of the mold. These have had a chance to cool for a couple of days, so they should be perfect. Just gently pressing from the center of that succulent shape until you feel it kind of start to pop out at the bottom. Might need a little bit of help. And then the next thing we want to check for is just to see if we were able to pierce that hole all the way through. If not, we may need to go back in. So looking at some of these shapes, we've got one where the hole pierced all the way through and then 3 more that we need to fix. So I'm going to take that skewer one more time, and going from the back, I'm just going to spin the skewer gently as I push it towards the front. And keep doing that until your skewer goes all the way through. And just repeat this until you've pierced all 4 of your succulent pieces. I'm just kind of putting my finger at the front so I can feel when that skewer goes through. Perfect. If you need to go in from the top just to open up that hole just a little more for the wick to slide through, feel free to do that. And remember, your succulent doesn't have to look perfect because all plants are not perfect. Now we can take these top pieces and assemble them to the base. We left the wick long just so that we had enough room to slide the succulent onto the candle. Before you slide the succulent onto your base candle, go ahead and check and make sure you don't need to touch up the tops. Once you've got the succulent on the base, you don't want to touch it up with the heat gun or you're going to lose all of that beautiful detail. So make sure you do that first. Our candles look great and we made these ahead of time, so they're fully set and ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and slide my wick right through that center. And then as you reach the top of the container, you might feel just a little resistance or see a little bit of that wax scraping off on the side, and that's totally fine. We're just gonna go ahead and wipe that off. You'll notice that that succulent fits nice and flush inside the container, which is exactly what we want. So we'll go ahead and do the other 3. Okay, now the last step is just to trim those wicks. I like to trim the wick to about 1/4 of an inch just to make sure that it's ready for proper burning. And I do that just in case I'm gonna gift it to someone. Not everyone knows that you should trim your wick before you burn. You could also use nail clippers. I've used those in a pinch, and that'll break through that wick really nicely. And that's it. We made 4 succulent candles, and these would make a great centerpiece on your coffee table or the perfect gift for the plant lover in your life. They're almost too cute to burn, but they smell so good, I think I'm gonna burn them anyway. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you wanna like our video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. You can also subscribe to the Bramble Berry channel for more inspiring tips and tricks and videos from the expert. Thanks, see you next time.